Was Jolly West using a lot of psychedelic drugs?
I don't actually know how much, but certainly
Quite
he
a bit.
was. And so he was an early, so he started off at the very start of MKUltra. He was working with LSD, sleep deprivation, other psychoactive drugs, and hypnosis.
Did you see the photo of that I showed Joe of Jolly West on the set of 2001: Space Odyssey?
No.
Oh, Steve, pull it up. Have you seen 2001: A Space Odyssey?
I have.
There's a photo of Jolly West walking in between sound stages with Stanley Kubrick on the set of that movie.
Amazing.
I mean, maybe you can confirm. Jamie didn't believe that this was Jolly West, but maybe you can confirm.
That actually, the
Zoom
guy
in.
right behind. Right.
Can you punch in, Steve?
It does look like him, but I can't. So what would he have been doing there, and what year would that be?
What year did they? That's a good question. Steve, find out what year they were filming 2001: A Space Odyssey. Rebecca would probably be the best person to confirm or deny that this could be accurate.
Well, I'm intrigued because I've tried to figure out everything I could about him, and he does like to talk about himself. So he never mentioned that.
Right.
But then
there's a lot of conspiracy theories that say that they got Stanley Kubrick to film the moon landing footage.
So it was released in 68, so it must have been filmed in 67?
Okay. So 66 or 67. It came out usually movies come out a year or two later after they're filmed.
Well, interestingly, so this may or may not be West, but he in 67 and 68, who was in Haight-Ashbury in his hippie, doing his research with at the Haight-Ashbury Medical Clinic and his other research in what he called the Psyche Pad, which was...
Can you find a photo of him from 68?
So I think by 68 he might have looked a little.
Yeah, okay.
This is good.
But I know he grew out his hair, which is one pertinent thing. He said he tried to fit in, and his graduate students who were working on the project described how he was wearing these hippie clothes, and he was maybe growing a beard.
Right, yeah, this is Tom O'Neill did a very good job of explaining all this in his book Chaos. Yeah. How even the students thought he was like kind of a wacko because he'd be hanging out with them and like getting high all day. And
sit on the couch with his friends.
Yeah.
Like, what is this project?
Any luck, Steve?
I think I found it's not dated. No, there's nothing that's...
You can't find anything, huh?
This is one... Oh, shit. There we go. This is one that I found, but it's not dated.
Yeah. It looks very much like him. I mean, the hairline is identical.
That's the Oklahoma period of West before he went to California. So 67, when if that is him, he was in the middle of transitioning from Oklahoma to California. He was spending his sabbatical year in Haight-Ashbury and in Palo Alto. So I don't know where that was filmed either, but of course he could have gotten around.
Yeah, find out where 2001: Space Odyssey was filmed. You can find all the set locations of it, all the filming locations. Because, just him even being around Stanley Kubrick is suspicious. I mean, whether it was on the set of 2001 or not, Maybe this was on the set. Maybe this was on the set of Clockwork Orange. I mean, you could see how he would be a key contributor to a show like that, right?
Well, this brings us back to what we were talking about. I mean, he'd be a perfect consultant for Clockwork Orange, and it looks more like a set of Clockwork Orange, doesn't it? Than like that looks almost like London or something. But anyway, it does. I'm just massively speculating.
I think they actually said that this was London or this was somewhere in Europe, right, Steve?
Oh, I don't remember.
Yeah, I think this was supposed to be shot in Europe. So maybe
in MGM British Studios in England, Hertfordshire.
So it's hard to tell. I mean, that would make it more like, well, I don't know. So you're saying 2001 was shot there.
I don't know. I thought it was. It's most likally Clockwork Orange was shot there.
Clockwork Orange is. We just talked about how it's from the 80s. It's done in the 80s. So this is definitely more this earlier era.
So filming locations for 2001 was Nambia, Arizona, Scotland, and Hertfordshire.
Okay. I don't know. We need to figure out where that photo was taken and what year, because that would give you It seems way more reasonable that he would be on this working with him on Clockwork Orange, because that's right up Jolly West's alley, and he would be the perfect consultant for something like that. But that's too late.
And
right?
by the 80s, he was denying any connection to the CIA.
Oh, really?
Even though it was in the record, and it was it was in all the papers.
Right.
But he said he had only ever experimented on animals, never on a human being. For years and decades, there are still people who think who were his friends who believed that.
Maintained
he was
that,
so
right?
fervent that he hadn't done any human experimentation.
Were there any close confidants of his that ever spoke out about him, or any said anything about him, other than like I think his son wrote a book, right?
His son wrote a book, but it was more about, you can read the book and discern that he was a difficult father and extremely given to serial affairs, and he had like different families in different places.
Oh my God.
And it caused his wife a lot of suffering in his family, so you get some of the dynamics, but he doesn't talk about that. But they're actually, and he was very good friends with Charlton Heston, which is interesting.
What?
They went back to they had been in the army together, and then even they were in Oklahoma City at the same time for reasons I guess maybe Heston was a struggling actor, and West was in his CIA years, and working for the University of Oklahoma. But they remained friends and lived in houses next to each other, basically in LA at the top of the mountains.
How did Jolly West first get into doing stuff like this?
Well, that is a really good question. I think it was through his mentor during his medical training. So he says he became a patriotic, red-blooded American, physician and scientist because the government paid for his education. This is what he says in one of his statements, and they sent him to medical school. I think it was University of Minnesota, but he did his residency in New York, and at the time he did his residency, Harold Wolff was there, and Wolff was an expert in basically migraine pain, but also in stress and sort of the human body at the limits of stress. He even had this scary-looking machine where he would invert people and see, if it induced headaches, and then he would try to cure them. He was very renowned, but West went to work for him, and Wolff he was the doctor to Alan Dulles' son, who had been injured in the Korean War.
Yeah.
And so through Wolff, early MKUltra funding came through New York. I think it was Columbia. Mm-hmm. And then West he got trained there to work on subjects like hypnosis and other things. And then he relocated to Lackland Air Force Base as a major, and he started up his own MKUltra program or sub-project because he basically, had this conversation with Sid Gottlieb about all the things he wanted to do, and he was so ambitious that Gottlieb said, "You're just the sort of man I think we've been dreaming of." Because he really wanted this kind of zone of free experiment. He wanted to build a space where he could change the conditions. It's really, again, harks back to those behaviorist ideas. Like if you could deprive someone of sleep, but also use hypnotic techniques, but also use the alteration of consciousness through drugs, like could you actually totally transform or break a person?
I don't remember where I read this, but I read that they were building black sites around the world outside of America where they could do these experiments on people and avoid the American law. Yeah,
I believe that's true. This was before MKUltra, but part of the CIA. There were various sites. There was a great interest in interrogation and truth serums.
Yes.
So could you, what could you make somebody confess to or, reveal? Really not false confessions, but could you break someone sufficiently that they'd reveal the information they had? So they had prisoners at various sites who could be the subject of terminal experiments. At least this is covered in John Mark's book, which is pretty authoritative. That people, and I think also John Lyle talks about it in his new book. Before MKUltra, there were these experiments where people would basically be killed after being essentially tortured through interrogation.
And where where were they finding these people?
So they were, from, I think some were from North Korea, maybe, and some were.
Good Lord.
There's, I'm forgetting exactly, but they were basically prisoners or spies who nobody was going to be checking up on, or they felt that.
That's so fucked up. And then what's this, Steve?
I found a date from Kubrick himself.
This is
as if he came back.
Somebody
alive.
has the Stanley Kubrick handle on Twitter. Wow. September 1965, NASA's George Mueller, a senior manager on the Apollo moon landing program, visits Stanley and Arthur C. Clarke as they prepared to shoot 2001: A Space Odyssey. After seeing the film blueprints, models, and sets, Mueller reported dubbed the studio NASA East. Interesting.
What's even more interesting is other people they have the same question. Like, who's the guy in the back?
Hang on. Scroll up. Let me read the top again. So why is so he's visiting Arthur C. Clarke to prepare to shoot 2001: A Space Odyssey. Wow. 65? Does this reconcile with what you know about where he was?
So that it interests me only because I don't know what he was doing in 65. There's kind of a gap after MKUltra. His funding does seem to dry up a bit. He's at University of Oklahoma. He still does, he does dress in suits at that point. Like later he kind of adopts in the 70s. You see him more in like lumberjack garb, and he's more casual at UCLA. But this would be his look at that period. But I don't know all the things he did in that period, so it would be interesting to know. And we'll say physically it sort of resembles him.
Oh my God. And how did Jolly West die?
He died by his son, basically killing him. He asked his son to kill him.
Because he had cancer?
He had very advanced, I forget what kind of cancer. He was going to die probably within another couple of months.
In the 90s, right?
In the late 90s. But it's really interesting in Mark West's book because he went on a press tour afterwards, and he gave all these interviews, and he wrote the book as a kind of tribute, and he talked about how he had to be very secretive. In a sense, he consulted with these societies, the Hemlock Society and others, about, it was basically seen as a mercy killing. He saw it as a mercy killing, but he didn't really want to do it, and his father sort of made him. And then about half a year later, his mother also got him to help her kill herself, or basically he killed her by administering drugs. And she just had, kind of medium stage dementia. So I think the toll was very heavy on him. So even though he wrote quite an amazing book about it, and it's a tortured book because he wants to say that he did this merciful thing and he was helping his parents, but you can't help but see this tortured family dynamic. And then he killed himself.
How did he kill himself? Same way?
I'm not sure how.
And also, why wouldn't you just, like, if you were going to overdose yourself, why couldn't you do that yourself? Why would you make your child do that to you? It seems like an easy thing to do yourself.
It did seem that my impression from the book, because it's quite well written. Do you know the name of it? I forget the name. Okay. Mark West. Okay. And he, I'm just forgetting the title, but it's very conspiratorial. It's like his father wanted to have a conspiracy with him. We're doing this together. He had to hide it from his sisters. That was the main thing. And the same thing with the mother. It was almost like they were bonding over this task, that this joint project, and that the project would ultimately be both of their deaths. So, and you can see that was not to, ultimately something he was able to reckon with.
That's sick. That's so sickening.
Yeah.
I found the book.
The Last Good Nights, assisting my parents with their suicides. Jesus.
The comments, at least last I looked, were very interesting because some friends of the family wrote in
on
the Amazon.
No
reviews.
way, left comments.
Yeah, like I love looking. Yeah,
go down. Let's read them.
Stuff.
Good book, but it shouldn't have said it shouldn't. It shouldn't have had to be this way. Interesting. Okay. John Stuart West, after killing his parents over a decade ago, took his own life on October 4th, 2014. I have to wonder if suicide became so normalized for him that this was his answer to his own psychological pain, for which he would not get meaningful help. His suicide note, quote note, via email to his friends was glib and completely cavalier, obviously written by a deeper, depressed, psychologically defended man. Has he not been recruited by his parents to assist them in their deaths? Perhaps he would be alive today. Suicide is not the answer. Nope, it's definitely not the answer, folks. Wow.
Yeah, it's very sad because he's an interesting man, and I thought
it would have been interesting to be able to talk to him.
He obviously had a tough family dynamic.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. To say the least.
Because, I mean, West, interesting. He just, he's hard to figure out. I was just talking to someone who knew him in the 70s. He said he spoke really slowly. This is what some people say. I mean, even though people were talking about how ebullient, he was called jolly because that did match his demeanor, but others describe him as speaking very slowly and hypnotically. And, but he would kind of use the killing, he famously, or maybe not famously, but he administered LSD to an elephant.
Oh yeah, Tusco, right?
Tusco, the elephant. And this is also heartbreaking if you actually read the article, because the female elephant who was Tusco's mate tried to hold him up while he was dying.
Oh no.
Isn't that like, but West, wrote this paper. I think he wanted to find, so this is an interesting connection. He was interested in the trigger to irrational violence, and male elephants are known to go into periods of irrational of violence, like during their must period. So it seems that he wanted to see if the LSD would trigger that, which is very related to his, this kind of questions at the time about LSD and violence, speed. Right. Also, whether amphetamines might trigger an LSD, in combination might trigger violence. They were sometimes wondering or seeing that, I think, in some studies with mice. So that may have been part of why he did this, but he didn't hesitate for the rest of his career to use the elephant, the Tusco's death, as kind of his calling card in a very flippant way. Like,
he was very proud of it.
Yeah, I'm the guy who killed the elephant. You kind of would swagger into a room. And he was known for that.
And didn't he have like a violence center that he wanted to create? Like a center for violence? That's a short word for it, or the short phrase was the Violence Center. And he considered it his greatest defeat, but in some ways it was right after the Haight-Ashbury period when he first got to UCLA, and he got $2 million of funding. It was all set to go, and it was going to be a center for the study and reduction of violence. There were like 29 affiliated projects within it. It was almost like a above board MKUltra in the sense that it was public. And one of the reasons it collapsed was that he made it public, but he was really interested in violence, but it kind of fell apart. He felt he was just attacked by people who didn't understand and who were his political enemies. And how did that stuff tie into what was going on with the Haight-Ashbury Clinic and Charles Manson? Because you can see, one of the things that Tom described, which you just described, is that they were not only messing with LSD, but they were also testing amphetamines with this place that was funded by that cutout that was CIA money. And the Manson murders are one of the most violent murders that's ever happened in this country, in the history of this country, on American soil. So the fact that there's a clear tie that I think Tom O'Neill points out in his book with all the people that Manson was connected with, bringing the girls there all the time, all the other shady things. So what is your understanding, or what is your opinion on what was happening with Charles Manson?
Yeah. Well, there are demonstrable studies that were being done involving Manson. So this is true. I mean, he was at the very least in observational studies, his family. These are so, I was actually just talking with Tom O'Neill last week about this because we're both interested in, I mean, I don't think it's determined yet that West, you can't put Jolly West in a room with Charles Manson, at least not in a documented way. Mm-hmm. But it is true that West had an office at the Haight-Ashbury Medical Clinic from the very beginning, and he was part of the crowd of people who were running the both the Haight-Ashbury Research Project, and his own observational study, which was really like a naturalistic study of these communes, of the different families, of how their psychodynamics and social dynamics worked. And so West and some of his colleagues were actually going into the field with the Manson family and others.
Really?
In Mendocino, yeah. And one of them was Alan Rose. And so there are people such as a graduate student and assistant at the Haight-Ashbury Medical Clinic named Gary Landis, so they are personally links between West and people like Alan Rose. And they were definitely treating the Manson and his family at the clinic. So you can bring them so close, but you don't really know. It's hard to tell exactly, if you want to trace West's role. What I do see is that people for many years were saying that the hippies turned from LSD to speed later, and that this caused like the Haight to become a violent and unpleasant place after the Flower Child period. Mm-hmm. And so the Amphetamine Research Project was tracking and interviewing these young, runaways and stuff, starting in 68. I think it was, 68. So one of the people working for West, Gary Landis, talks about how he went into the medical clinic and he observed them interviewing kids who were amphetamine addicts. Like they were tracking them over time. So West used to say something like, or people used to say, Manson was unusual in that he was a speed addict first, and then he got into LSD, and then he stopped because he didn't really like needles. But his family definitely, this was the lore, why maybe amphetamines didn't have anything to do with the murders or whatever. This is what people used to say. But actually, it does seem that he and his family were increasingly turning to speed at the same time, or amphetamines and speed.
Injecting it?
Well, maybe not injecting it because he didn't like needles.
Gotcha.
But, they could be orally taking it, or
right.
It's not, this is just something that has come up in various interviews. But there was a curiosity about triggering violence and the potential connection between LSD and violence, and certainly Manson obviously used LSD in his relationships. I mean, this is,
right.
His people like his Susan Atkins and others talked about how they would try never to come down. Like they were vying to see who could never come down from one day to another. So they were very addled. And then if you add other substances. And so it's interesting. I mean, there are parallels in the NIMH funded research. So you don't see the name CIA. You don't see any of these earlier cutouts.
What is NIMH?
The National Institute of Mental Health.
Okay.
They were funding a couple of these projects.
Right.
Because they were just interested. They were interested, and they wanted, on one level, they had an interest in curing addiction. There seemed to be a mass epidemic of amphetamine addiction.
Yeah, it's I always wonder whether or not with the stuff that they were testing on Charles Manson and the family, like were they trying to aim for a specific result, or were they just throwing shit at the wall to basically see what would happen? Or were they trying to guide them in any specific way,
I'm not sure they were even testing on them. I mean, I don't think that's been proven. I think they were naturalistically observing them. And
they were just observing them as like wild animals.
And also, the problem is with naturalistic observation is people, throughout time they get involved with their subjects. And West himself in his own diary wrote, "I'm getting too close to my subjects." These were he was involved in many different things.
Right.
And his other other of his team also became involved. Like they not only went to, sort of anthropologically observe the family, but they were sleeping with them sometimes, the women, or they sort of get involved. But I'm not sure I don't believe that there were formal, at least nothing in the record, nothing that they would have published or nothing that NIMH would have sponsored, which would have allowed the actually giving or, testing or experimenting with Manson or anything like that.
Well, I mean, one of the biggest questions about that, though, is like, why did he kept getting let out of prison by Roger Smith,
Well, this is such a good, it's true. It's remarkable. So you can say it is possible. So that there could be clandestine papers, studies, who knows, but Roger Smith it's really odd that he was both, a prominent researcher in amphetamine addiction. He was doing these experiments with mice and with complicated protocols. He was also friends with David A. Smith, who ran the Haight-Ashbury Medical Clinic, and he was Manson's parole officer. Like, that's very hard to understand, and he kept releasing him. But he says that, I think he said at one point, there was a program to try releasing parolees to see if they would do better. So, it doesn't really, like a criminological experiment of some kind. It's not easily explained. I think that's why Tom O'Neill's book is very striking.
He didn't commit any like real violent crimes though, did he? Before that, weren't they just like petty theft and like stealing a car and some other things that wouldn't lock him up forever? Or did he actually like?
Well, he and his family did kill a Buddhist practitioner in a drug deal, some sort of right before the murders. Like,
oh yes.
But before that, Manson actually his family was known. Some people say, at least Alan Rose at one point said, actually they're kind of like model hippies. At least he takes care of them. He brings them to the doctor. They're not just in squalor, but because he was pimping out the women in the family too. But so, and he had career ambitions, Manson. So
right, yeah.
So yeah, I don't think he didn't
Beach
have
Boys.
He didn't have actually much history of violence that I know of. Like he of course he didn't commit these murders himself. His family did.
Right. But he was there. He went there right afterwards, right? And then there was the one after the Tate murders, the LaBianca murders. I think that was the next night, right?
Right.
He was there, I believe, right? I think he was out front, or maybe he didn't go inside.
It was very nearby.
Yeah, very close by. And then another weird thing about the Tate LaBianca murders is that there was a CIA agent who made a phone call. I don't remember if you remember that from the buyer. It's one of the really curious things about that book was this guy who called somebody, I can't remember who, and like told them at like 8 o'clock in the morning, or like first thing in the morning, before the first phone call to the police ever even happened. And this guy was like a legitimate like CIA, I don't know if he was an agent or an actual like officer. I think he was probably just an agent working for the CIA, giving them information. This guy ended up being a ghost, and they never found who he was. But I think Tom included photos of this guy in the book, so that's really curious. Were they just following him? Were they just observing him? Like, did they know? Did they like see like, oh my God, this guy's gonna? What are they doing? And they found out like, fuck, this is getting out of control. I don't know, but the fact, also the other thing about how the prosecutor covered the story of the prosecutor and him writing that book and like covering up all those really blatant facts and really crazy connections to Manson.
Vince Bugliosi.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why Tom's book is very compelling.
Right.
I mean, he finds all these.
And how he started meeting with Vince, and Vince was like, oh yeah, come on, let's talk about it. And as soon as Tom started digging in too deep, Vince completely like shut him down and cut him out.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, people. I mean, he's reputationally damaging, I gather.
Totally, yeah.
And I think, in the Haight-Ashbury free medical clinic did do a lot of amazing things. So it would be frustrating. I mean, it's not just one. It's not like it just simply was a front for the CIA or anything. But
it shut down 2 weeks after he released the book.
Yeah, because his reputation was so damaged by it. So he's quite upset. I mean, I can understand that. You spend your whole life doing that. So.
Yeah. It just makes me wonder, like, all the money and resources and projects that they had devoted to this stuff in the 60s. Like, imagine what they could possibly do now with the internet and social media.
Looking at, for example, the Patty Hearst trial in the mid-'70s and the case of Patty Hearst. I mean, when there was a firefight to capture her and the group who had kidnapped her.
For people who don't know who she is, can you give a brief?
So the short story is she was the granddaughter of William Randolph Hearst, who was immortalized in the Citizen Kane in the fictional. So he was a publishing magnate, basically a billionaire equivalent in his day, and his granddaughter was one of, I think, 4 or 5 girls who were brought up in this family, and she went to college at UC Berkeley at the age of 19. She was living in the town of Berkeley. She was studying art history. She was a sophomore, and this group called the Symbionese Liberation Army discovered that she was, this daughter of a wealthy capitalist family, as they saw it, was studying, and they wanted to make what they called a righteous arrest of her. So they went by her apartment where she was living with her fiancé, who had been her math teacher, actually, in this private school she'd gone to. So she's 19. She's taken out of her apartment. They bludgeon her boyfriend, leave him on the floor. She was watching TV with him, so she's wearing a bathrobe. They shove her in the trunk of their car. They drive off, shooting up the street, and they keep her in a closet for 59 days, reading Maoist propaganda to her, forcing her to listen to broadcasts, and covering her eyes so she can't see for that whole time. She's never alone. She has to submit to rape, or they say, if you're a person of good faith and you're starting to believe in us, which she had to kind of pretend that, at first she had to pretend that she was, she had to sleep with various members of this group. So she submitted to rape. She was moved to a different closet, and over the course of these 59 days, she had to release cassette tapes of her reading messages to her parents. And at first, she sounds really shaky, and these are broadcast on all the local and national radio stations. And she's saying things like, "Mom, Dad, I'm okay," but they seem like a decent group. She's saying, you should listen to what they say. Oh, wow. Do what they want. And then her messages start to transform over the next month or two. And she's saying, they're actually pretty cool. She says
off script.
She said, no, I mean, she just was, she had to convince them that she was starting to believe in them, or that she had been converted. Because she said, I decided I wanted to live. Because they had just massacred the local superintendent of Oakland schools. So they were they were highly armed. They were constantly doing these military exercises. They told her they were just one branch of this paramilitary organization that was, revolutionizing the United States and was going to bring about a new system of government. And so she was so disoriented.
What was the name of the military group?
They call themselves the Symbionese Liberation Army.
Symbionese Liberation Army?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's a whole story there. Their leader was a former convict named Donald DeFreeze, who renamed himself Sinku, and he said that he had been he was almost like a guru, and he had recruited all these middle class students. He was black, and most of the members were white, and he said this was going to create a new system in the United States. And basically, if they could get Patty Hearst to join them, it would look really good for their cause. And so after about a month and a half, they sat her down, they took off her blindfold finally, and they let her see them. And they said, "Do you want to join us?" And she said she basically had to this is why it's known as a brainwashing case, or they tried to make this argument that she had to make herself into a soldier in their army if she wanted to live, which she could have easily not, because she knew they would never return her to her parents. And so in a week or two, there's a famous picture of her holding an automatic weapon, and she ended up robbing a bank with the other members of the group. And she said,
75?
Yeah.
Wow.
And she declared that she had a new name. She was no longer Patricia Hurst. She was going to be called Tanya. And so eventually she went on the run with this group. A whole bunch of things happened.
Oh my God.
And people in the country didn't believe that they seemed like they kind of forgot that she'd been kidnapped. And they started to assume that she was a willing participant in this gang, and they were associating her with the hippies and with the radicals of that time. And so she was tried in 1976, and Louis Jolyon West was the lead expert who, in her defense.
Wow.
Because he
what?
was...
How did that happen?
Yeah.
That's bananas.
But
so he was defending her.
He was, actually all of the main brainwashing experts from the 50s, from the earlier POW incidents, were then recalled to this trial. They were brought forward again. So Robert J. Lifton, Martin Orne, and Louis Jolyon West, but West was really the lead expert witness, and he was called to describe what had happened to her and hopefully exonerate her, but he failed massively on the stand because he perjured himself very quickly, and also because he didn't do a very good job. Well, he basically disqualified brainwashing as a legal defense, even while he was claiming that she was.
Oh no.
But I mean, one of the things is that most of the group was killed in a firefight, which is even to this day probably the largest firefight that was in the city limits of LA. And it was the first deployment of a SWAT team, at a large scale. And I guess originally why I was thinking about this is so many things were new about technology. Like they never had synced sound to image. So this firefight happened live on television, and people all over the nation saw the Symbionese Liberation Army members, 6 of them burn. They didn't see their bodies burn, but they saw their safe house burn on live television with sound synced to the image and with portable minicam. So all these things that, they were totally new in 1975 when that happened. And I think we just assume sometimes that these things have always existed, but actually it was kind of, things were changing so quickly even then. But anyway, they assumed that Hurst had also died in the firefight, but she happened to be out doing errands. And that's a whole other story, which is very amazing.
What ended up happening to her after all of this?
So she was left with 2 other members of the SLA, the Harrises, who were a married couple. And Bill Harris was, he had beaten up Patty Hurst when she was first.
Right.
He was always beating her up, but they were also working with her. So they said, we're going to go on the lam with you, because basically the rest of the group died. So they had to go underground, and people started ferrying them across the U.S. They ended up spending a whole summer, I think it was in Pennsylvania maybe, and they were helping Hurst. They wanted her to write her autobiography, and they wanted it to be a bestseller, talking about her transformation and her belief in this new revolutionary army. And it was kind of like the POWs in the sense that she was constantly working on her confession, her repudiation of her family, how she had seen the light, how she had changed. And ultimately, though, she was discovered and arrested, and people couldn't understand why she hadn't just run away during that. There was about a year when she was on the lam when the security wasn't that tight, and she, arguably could have just walked away. Right. But she said that she was this happens often with people who have been abducted. They're so entrained and so fearful. Like it's a kind of
they start to feel protected by their abuser.
Yeah, they cling to the situation because she also, when she saw the way the SWAT teams in the LAPD came after her group and slaughtered them on live TV, she thought and they thought she was in the building. She knew that she didn't feel protected by her own government. So
yeah, that seems like a common thing, even in relationships with husbands and wives, where the husband can be abusive to the wife and they've been together for 10 years and he's been abusing her for 10 years. It's like she can't, some women are unable to leave the relationship, where it's just like, I'm so used to this, I can't do change, this sucks, but I'm gonna stick to it, and it's easier for me to stay here and be abused than to get out of it.
Yeah, I think coercively controlling relationships also have financial elements of control. It's very difficult, especially if you have children.
Yeah.
The dynamics of domestic violence are similar. Also, the dynamics of people, young women often who are abducted by, when they're really young and held.
Right. Yeah.
The famous case of Elizabeth Smart. At a certain point, years in, there are moments and they eventually do break away. But it's hard to know what that moment is. And of course, you're risking your life if you try to reveal who you are.
Right.
I have a chapter where I write about this Leonard Kyle, who was a Cambridge, Massachusetts engineer who received these experimental brain implants in the I think it was the late 60s, early 70s. And he started to feel that his doctors were...
Is this the Terminal Man?
He was... Well, it turns out he was that Michael Crichton was his...
That's insane.
Was the
Can you explain that whole story?
Yeah, so the whole story is that I had... so Leonard Kyle was this really gifted, self-taught engineer who grew up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but from a working class family. He briefly was in the military. He had some sort of he was also raised in part-time in an orphanage because his mother couldn't afford to keep him and his siblings at home. So he was possibly exposed to abuse when he was a kid at this church where the orphanage was. But at any rate, he became incredibly successful, especially for someone who didn't have a PhD. He was one of the inventors at Polaroid of patents for optical devices that were essential for their Instamatic cameras. And he also worked for many prominent defense industry companies at the time, in the 60s. So his mother was really proud of him. He got married to his childhood sweetheart, and they started to have a large family. And he was flying around the world too, sometimes overseeing. He was instrumental in inventing the triggers for nuclear bombs, test bombs.
Oh wow!
Because the optical aspect of them, and anyway, he was troubled by that, and he ended up quitting the defense work, but he ended up at Polaroid. At any rate, he was starting to have, as his family grew and as he was experiencing marriage difficulties, he was also in a car accident. Anyway, he had the normal run of, it seems like he had the normal run of stresses. He also worried that his wife was having an affair with the boarder who had come to live with him to save some money. At any rate, they went for therapy. One of his doctors was recommended that he check himself into to Mass General Hospital, where there was a violence unit, and this was actually ultimately possibly connected. At any rate, it was possibly
a violence unit.
A violence unit. It was an experimental unit that was being set up by two doctors named Frank Irvin and Vernon Mark. And Vernon Mark was a neurologist who was a psychosurgeon, and Frank Irvin was a psychiatrist or psychologist too. And they were both interested in whether violence could be controlled. So this guy, Leonard Kyle, he had these arguments with his wife, and there were allegations possibly that he was very temperamental. Mm-hmm. So his therapist thought that maybe he'd be a candidate for brain implants that would quell his violence, and they were So there's kind of like, there was later a lawsuit which alleged that these were not necessary treatments and that he was actually an experimental subject or a guinea pig. But at any rate, he agreed because his wife said if he didn't undergo this treatment, she would divorce him. He accepted, these temporary implants initially, and the implants were put in his amygdala. There were many theories at the time that the amygdala is the seat of violence. So there's an array of electrodes implanted in his amygdala, and his head was stabilized with a stereotactic device, which looks very torturous, but it is actually sort of state of the art at the time.
Steve, can you find photos?
And they would stimulate different parts of his brain, and of the amygdala. And when he responded, he would say things like, I feel like I'm floating on a cloud. I feel bliss. Or he would seem to get really angry. So they wanted to find those spots that triggered anger. And ultimately, I won't jump ahead, but basically they found those spots, and they got him to agree to consent to a permanent operation that would sever or surgically cauterize those parts of his brain from firing. So hopefully he would become less violent. But the thing is, they got him to sign the consent form while he was in a state of bliss, while his brain was being stimulated in the other area. So this was one thing his family later brought up in the lawsuit. At any rate, these two doctors carried out the operation, and Kyle was never the same. He was never able to work again, and he became paranoid. He became convinced that doctors from MIT and Harvard were pursuing him. He fled across the country to try to see his mother, who lived in California, and he was found wandering around in a parking lot in a dazed state, and the police rounded him up, and he said, no, I'm the inventor. I'm an important engineer. I invented these patents. And it was actually true. He just seemed like a madman, and he never recovered, but he just continued to have these delusions that he was in a science fiction story. And it turns out that actually the assistant to Doctors Mark and Irvin was Michael Crichton, who was a Harvard medical student at the time. And Michael Crichton ended up writing The Terminal Man about him. And if you read The Terminal Man, you'll see that the doctor's initials are M and E for Mark and Irvin, but he just changes their name.
Oh my God. So he wasn't delusional.
He was paranoid. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean it's not happening.
Right.
And he was both like in incredible pain. And then his wife did end up going on and marrying the boarder in the house.
So she was having an affair.
Well, maybe not at the time, but maybe there was flirtation or something. We don't know. But I've actually been in contact with a couple of his grandchildren and they're very, have become interested in the story because they never knew about it. They just thought the boarder was their grandfather.
Oh, wow. Oh, my God.
Is this him? I'm unsure.
I don't think that's
This is Neuralink.
him,
Neuralink goes wrong. Implant.
So that
Leonard.
might be Leonard Kyle, but it might not be Kyle.
I only found one actual image of him. He's kind of hard to find. He doesn't exist on Google. There's an article.
Oh, interesting. What was that photo of, though?
That might have been someone who so
there it is.
These Mark and Irvin. So Frank Irvin, ultimately, when the lawsuit happened, Irvin was summoned to court, both of them, and they were eventually exonerated. But there was such a scandal in Massachusetts that Irvin took a job at UCLA, and guess who his boss was? Louis Jolyon West.
West.
Yeah, he was one of the first people who came aboard when the Violence Center was being planned.
Oh my God.
So later, his mother talked about how she thought the CIA was involved, but this hasn't been proven.
Have you heard of the story about the guy who's the most studied man in brain science? He was a guy he had an operation. I think he had some sort of a traumatic brain injury where something happened, and he was I think he was developing epilepsy or something like this. He was having really bad seizures and having, like, as he was getting older, his epilepsy kept getting really, really bad. So he agreed to do some experimental brain surgery where they removed a certain part of his brain, and when he recovered, they realized it completely wiped out his short-term memory. So every single day he would wake up and it would be the same day again. Like, he would have no memory of the day before. but he had specific long-term memory. And this sort of debunked the myth that they thought like memory was stored in the whole brain. So apparently like this was, what they deduced from this was that like different types of memory are stored in different parts of the brain. And then there was this other lady who took him in and like did all these other studies on him throughout his life and wrote all of this stuff on him. And it was fascinating. It was in this book called Moonwalking with Einstein, all about memory. Have you heard of that?
I have.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Well, one fascination with this type of psychosurgery is that not Kyle, but another patient who was called Julia in the records, she received the same implants, but it was remotely controlled. And these were a special device that this scientist named Delgado had come up with.
I'm familiar with him.
Yeah, so he worked.
He did the bull thing,
Yeah,
right?
he did the bull thing. And he worked with Mark and Irvin. They co-published articles together about the stimoceiver. So Julia, Leonard Kyle didn't receive the stimoceiver. In other words, they couldn't remotely control him, but it did seem that their interest was in violence triggers and remote control. And that with this young woman who was 19, they did achieve that. And there was actually an article in Life magazine about it.
What did they do to her?
Well, they just, so she was violent, like episodically, rarely, but episodically.
Yeah.
And so her family, allowed this to be done. And she was apparently, when she wasn't violent, she was a mild-mannered, lovely, beautiful young woman who played the guitar. And she came from a suburb of Boston or something like that. And so they show her, there are photographs of her in the article in Life, but they showed how they could stimulate her brain and she would fly into a rage, and there's a photograph of her throwing herself at the wall. Oh my God. And it's just blurry because she's throwing herself with such force. And then they have another photograph and she's wearing the stimoceiver and her head's all bandaged and she's playing the guitar. It's a really horrifying article. Which is hard to find online because it's not available in the Google archives. But at any rate, she apparently never recovered fully. Not at all. She didn't really recover at all, but
Can you explain what the Facebook experiment was? The emotional Facebook experiment?
Yeah, so it was published in 2014, but the research ran in 2012. And it was a study, so it was published in the the proceedings, anyway, I can't remember the name of the publication, but it's a very prominent publication. So in the experiment, about 700,000 users were selected without being told, because the user agreement allows one to be, it was in PNAS. The user agreement allows you to be... the
Facebook, like the general user agreement.
Yeah, any general user agreement of that platform, and really any platform, subjects you to A/B testing or experimentation. So 689,003 users. Massive scale. So the title's really interesting, and this was the last time that the Facebook research team published in such a prominent journal, and I think it was partly they wanted to announce this. It was a little bit of like planting a flag and showing that they had done something that was historic in the field of operationalizing emotion. So the basic experiment was somewhat simple. They divided these users into 3 groups. The first group was exposed to their news feed was altered. So instead of receiving the regular algorithmically delivered feed, you got a more negative feed. Then that was measured by word counting software that claimed that measures the emotional state. So it was more negative, and those people then were tracked in how they responded. Did they post more negative things? Did they react in a more negative way as measured by software?
So they measured their reaction by their posts.
By any kind of reaction or emoticon.
And these people had no idea they were part of this experiment.
Right, and that they discovered, and then another group, their feed was altered positively and to a greater or lesser degree or intensity of positivity. And then that group was also traced in its response. And then a third group was a control group, so their feed was unaltered. And the discovery was that the negatively altered group then posted in a statistically significantly more negative way. The positive group was more positive, but in less striking.
Right.
And then the control group was unaltered. And so, but what's interesting too is that the article talks about this, that they say they've operationalized emotional contagion. And emotional contagion was kind of a concept that psychologists have been talking about since the 90s, or perhaps it had been defined in the 1990s, but really it goes much longer back. The question of how do you spread emotion? And people have always known, of course, that if you're in a room with somebody, you're having a conversation like we are, you could be spreading. This is like the the essence of a mother-child bond or something like that. But the question was, could emotion be spread? Could negative emotion be spread? Could it be done if you're not in the physical presence of someone? Could it be done across vast distances? And could it be done at scale with a massive, that's why they say massive scale. So the article is really kind of triumphantly announcing that, yes, we've proved that this can happen even in the absence of any kind of contact.
Wow, because it's completely not efficient to use actual drugs on people, because you can't affect a population. You can't go give somebody some acid, every single, however many people are on, in the country. What is it like 500 million people in the US, something like that. But if you can find a way to manipulate what they already have in their hand 24/7, they're staring at, and use something use the tools that are on their phones already to sort of manipulate the chemical balance in their mind, that would be the perfect way to do this.
And what I discovered too was that, so some people wrote into when it became publicized, because it got a lot of attention, this experiment in 2014, although, so some people wrote into Facebook saying, could I ever know if I was in this experiment? Because I became very depressed during that period. I was in the hospital with suicidal ideas, and I want, it was very heartbreaking, and others were outraged. There was an investigation of some of the researchers, but it really came to nothing as far as I can tell, and everyone was essentially promoted. But what I discovered is that some interesting things, there's not necessarily a direct connection, but the word counting software that was used to measure negativity, to measure the emotion in the experiment, was actually trained on people's diaries, because they said we need to be able to measure as if we were able to enter the minds of the subject. The software developers said, who are psychologists, they said, so we'll have people write about the worst thing that's ever happened to them in diaries, and then we'll take that and sort of make it's almost like a preliminary language model. 20 years ago, and they use that. This is just the accounting software itself, but so it struck me, it's almost more symbolic, but interesting that it was trained on the data of trauma, essentially. And I'd also discovered that the definition of emotional contagion also goes back to this kind of classic study that was done at the University of Hawaii about trauma, essentially. So it's not simply just trauma, but really just that. You also find this in the earlier cases with cults and with POWs, is that the unresolved emotions, people would say, whatever issues you have, your trauma. And now we understand trauma to be far more pervasive than it used to be seen as. It used to be seen as incredibly rare. Like a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist who was trained in the 60s, he said, you would expect to run across maybe 1 or 2 cases your entire life, and it would have been someone who'd been in a fire and been burned over most of their body. But of course, the definition and our sense of it has changed radically. But I think it gives us some insight into how everyone has something that can be some emotional tug or trigger or whatever it is. So I try to shift the focus a little bit away from ideological battles to the sense that these platforms, and I think concerningly AI companionship, these AI companions really trade on a kind of emotional conduit or contagion between the users. Yeah.
And it's funny how easily people can be swayed online too. Like for example, there's this phenomena on, I don't know how often you read YouTube comments or read through like X or whatever, but there's this phenomenon on YouTube. Specifically, if there is like an a decent amount of commenters on a video, right? Let's just say it's like a political video of something that happened in the news during like today. And there's out of 1,000 comments, the top 50 comments, top 100 comments, all are sort of agreeing about one thing. A new person who comes in and starts to read those comments without even watching the video, they are gonna go along with the consensus and agree with them, and it's not incentivized for somebody to come in and just disagree with everybody.
Yeah,
they want to feel like they're a part of the group. They want to feel like they fit in. Yeah. So there's this thing, it's called the pylon effect on YouTube. So like if somebody comes in and says something, everyone starts piling in, and it's not necessarily like their independent thought. They're not using like their critical thinking skills at all. They're just sort of like joining into this group discussion.
Yeah, it's kind of that's a great example. I've definitely seen that. I'm very interested in YouTube. I'm interested in YouTube comments just because for years scholars and historians have always wanted, user data, or what they call it, reception. Like you can never really know. Say you're trying to study a literary text or something, a book someone published, even like Brave New World, you'd have to look at reviews, and maybe someone wrote in their diary, like, I read this book, but you wouldn't really get it. You wouldn't really get a lot of data, but now we have this incredible resource. And so I do think YouTube comments are fascinating. And what you're describing is, I imagine people have done studies, but I'm not aware of them, how this contagion might occur. But and
it's interesting too, because a lot of the comments are fake bots.
Oh yeah, that's true. And people don't necessarily, well, there was that study that was then pulled, right, by the it's a European university that it was like studying Reddit threads and
I never saw this.
I think it was it was
a study on Reddit threads.
Yeah, they just had to recently pull it because it was unethical. But I think they were having people misrepresent who they were, and then they were trying to, achieve a contagious effect. And people just aren't. Other users weren't good at evaluating the human or non-human status, the botness of who they were interacting with. But also, what struck me is, like, if you look at some YouTube. If you look at the comments, for example, on a Joe Rogan episode, which, they're interesting because you realize it is a community too. Like, people are talking to each other. So it's not simply just a group think, but it's actually a thing in itself, which I think is interesting.